Shalom and welcome to the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. We're looking today at Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 17. You may recall in verse 16 we began a new subsection, a new oracle, where the Lord was calling his people, reminding them that he had called them to go back and look to the ancient paths and to find rest for their souls. But they said, we will not look for that. We will not walk in those old paths. The Lord's continuing a similar line of reasoning with them in verse 17 here today. A pretty simple verse. Let's go ahead and read it in Hebrew as we get started. V'hakimoti alechem tzofim, hakshivu lekol shofar, vayomeru lo nakshiv. Well, we start with a vav attached to a perfect. You see this T sufformative ending on it, so this is going to be a perfect. It's going to be a first common singular. With the hey here and a hirik here, we don't have a hirik yod, but we have the signs of a hifil. And this is going to be from our good old verb kum, which means to arise, to get up. And the hifil would be to cause to arise or to establish something or someone. And this is perfect. So it would be, and I established. Now, the vav at the beginning is a little bit of a question, because is this a simple conjunction, and I established, or is this a vav consecutive? And we can't tell by the form. The path that's underneath the vav is simply because of the composite schwa following it. So we can't tell by the form like we can with an imperfect consecutive. So it has to come from the context. So this might be, it could be a consecutive throwing this into the future, or it might be a simple conjunction keeping it in the past. Let's keep it in the past for the time being, although you'll see one translation at least which puts it in the future. And I established over you, is your suffix, over y'all, this is a plural you, tzofim. Well, what is this? Well, we get an O vowel here, a little cholam, a good sign of a kal participle, and the im ending on us would tell us, yes, indeed, we have a masculine plural participle, kal, from our verb tsafa, which means to look out, to watch. So at sofer, Atsofe is regularly the participle form used as a substantive for a watchman. The hay drops off, we make it a plural, obviously. So watchman, the very typical word, for instance, in the book of Ezekiel. Now, often in this context, it can refer to a literal watchman on the wall, somebody that's looking out over the wall or from a tower, but it's often used for in the context of the Lord's prophets. So Jeremiah himself, Ezekiel would be a watchman. The prophets who came before, Isaiah and the others, would be considered that same kind of a ministry of being a watchman for the people. So I established over you watchmen, in other words, prophets. Hakshivu. So this is an imperative. IMPV. And it's a 2MP. This is a hifil. You have all the signs of it here. You have this ha prefix with the hirik yod, and from the verb kashav, which we've seen before. We actually saw it back up in verse 10, which means to pay attention to listen carefully to the sound of ram's horn. We don't have articles. We almost need them in English. The sound of the ram's horn, the sound of the ram's horn, or the alarm, is sort of that idea, which is what the watchman will be blowing. They'll be blowing the ram's horn to give that alarm. So the Lord's saying, listen to that alarm when it goes off. And they said, we should probably take this vav here because of the contrast and the context here as a but instead of an and. But they said, we have an imperfect consecutive, obviously here, then a 3MP kal from Amar, but they said lo nakshiv. So once again we have a hifil, only this time we have this is an imperfect first common plural with the na prefix and a hifil from the same verb kashav. We will not pay attention. So we see the people refusing to listen to the warnings that were given by the watchmen, by God's prophets, even though God in his grace had warned them over and over and over. Well, pretty simple in its analysis. Let's go ahead and hide our work here and look at three translations. Not a lot of variation in the major translations. New Jerusalem Bible, for instance, I posted lookouts, I like that word, for watchmen, on your behalf. Listen to the sound of the trumpet. So listen, we put the thes in, even though they're not actually. Listen to the alarm, listen to the sound of the trumpet. But they said, we will not listen. Pretty straightforward. Then the New English Bible, this says a little bit different. Then I will appoint watchmen. Now it's this future aspect here. So they've taken this vav here as a consecutive instead of a simple conjunction, and they think that this is actually flipping this into the future. I'm not as happy with that translation because I think that by Jeremiah's time, the prophets that are warning the people are just about coming to an end. Jeremiah is doing it here. Ezekiel will be doing it in Babylon. But I don't think it's a future thing that's going on anymore. I think the Lord is saying, I've been doing this over and over, and the time has come now for the judgment. So I'm not quite as happy with this future as opposed to the past. And there aren't too many translations that put this in the future. I will appoint watchmen to direct you, over you. Listen for their trumpet call. You don't have the word there in there, but obviously the context is valid for that, works that out. But they said, we will not. Okay, pretty straightforward. And then one final one, the New Living Translation, which is very clearly a paraphrase. They added a little nuance. I posted watchmen over you who said, listen for the sound of the alarm. So you see what they've done in the New Living Translation. They've made this section here, listen for the sound of the alarm. They've made that to be something that the watchmen are saying. I'm not convinced of that. I don't think it's the watchman who said that. I think it's God himself who said, listen to the sound of the trumpet. Listen to the sound of the ram's horn. The watchmen are blowing the ram's horn. Listen for that. Whereas here, the New Living Translation is making it sound like it's the watchmen who are saying, listen to the alarm that we're going to sound. That's just a little fine point, but it's a nuance that I don't quite agree with. I just questioned that one there. But you replied, no, we won't pay attention. In any case, the sad thing here is to see the people refusing to walk in God's ways, in verse 16, refusing to listen to his warnings through his prophets in verse 17. And yet we shouldn't be that terribly surprised, because if we're honest with ourselves, our own human hearts are so slow and so stubborn sometimes, and we don't want to listen to the warnings that we hear as we read God's word, or what we hear from our pastors and preachers who bring that word to us. There's much of our own hearts in this verse as well, and God does speak to us through a verse like this as well. We'll check back with us soon. We have more things to work through in Jeremiah chapter 6, so we'll see you soon for the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Shalom.